live Q&A. We do this every Saturday and Sunday, 6 o'clock Eastern on Saturdays and 4 p.m. Eastern on Sundays. This is the part of the week where, after watching my content for the whole week and learning a little bit about social studies, you guys get to come here and ask me anything you want to about history, social sciences, things along that nature. We are here every Saturday at 6 and Sunday at 4 p.m. Eastern. And like I said, it's an Ask Me Anything, so you get to ask me anything about the channel, anything about social studies, historical topics. If you are interested in learning more about that, like and subscribe to the channel. That's how you become a friendly neighborhood historian. And it's as easy as liking this live stream and subscribing to the channel. And of course, I've got daily uploading content all the time, usually in the form of shorts, but I'm doing longer length videos as well. And so we've got a lot to cover, a lot of topics that I want to go over this weekend. It's a very consequential weekend with a lot of celebrations in it and a lot of history to talk about. But of course, as always, whatever history you want to bring up in channel, that's what you guys feel free to do so. Drop it in the chat and I will get to it at an appropriate time and we'll talk about it. Some of these live streams have been really, really good, and a lot of them go over an hour because everybody's asking a lot of great questions. So liking and subscribing the channel helps it grow. I really appreciate that. My goal is to hit 5,000 subscribers by the end of the year. We are cornering in on 4,900. I believe we're just at 4,900, 4,800. I'm not exactly sure, but anyways, so we are, I don't know what I'm atoning for, Simon, but I don't know exactly what you're referring to, but we've got a lot to talk about today, some topics, but if you have anything you would like to ask about, please be sure to drop it in the chat and I will get to it at a reasonable time. Liking and subscribing really helps this channel grow, and my goal is 5,000 subscribers by the end of the year. So hopefully you guys can help me out with that. And of course, we'll be back tomorrow for part 2, Sunday at 4 p.m. Eastern. Yes, today is Yom Kippur, the holiest day in the Jewish year. It is what is called, translates into English, the Day of Atonement. Yom is the Hebrew word for day, and Kippur, meaning atonement. So it is the Day of Atonement in Judaism. I typically do acknowledge and talk about different religious holidays and celebrations and different important traditional and cultural aspects of different religions and ethnic groups that help impact social studies and world history. And definitely Yom Kippur is definitely one of those things. So I want to talk a little bit about that. That is the Jewish Day of Atonement. And how did we get to having a Jewish Day of Atonement? Where does it come from? I'll be talking about that a little bit. Yes. In Israel, yes, it is, I believe, 1 a.m. So people tuning in now are from Israel. We've had people who come in from Israel before. It is 1 a.m. So it's technically over, their celebration. But for many Jews all over the United States of America and the Western world, Yom Kippur continues until sundown on Saturday, sundown tonight. So coming to an end for a lot of people, already over for a lot, but an extremely important holiday in Judaism and an extremely important holiday for the development of Jewish thought, Jewish culture, but also the culture and identity of the West, because in many ways, as many people like to point out, the United States and the West is formed in many ways through, yes, okay, yes, anyways, so there's a lot going on, obviously, with that holiday. I'm just seeing the new people in the chat. Thank you, that's very funny. I love it when people are trolling. So, like I said, we'll be talking a little bit. We will be talking a little bit about about Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. But hello, welcome. I've got somebody from London. I believe it's a few hours ahead there. It's in the evening. Always fun to have people from everywhere. No, Mike, that did not happen. Hi, welcome. My content is social studies. This is a live Q&A, Ask Me Anything, where you get to bring up any social studies, history-related topics you would like to discuss, and I will answer them in the chat. That's the goal. If you like and subscribe, it helps my channel grow. This is the Friendly Neighborhood History channel, and the way you become a friendly neighborhood historian is by liking and subscribing. So my content is usually social studies related, history related, so if you have any questions regarding those topics, anything that you want to learn more about, anything that you're interested in, bring it up in the chat and I will address it to the best of my ability. You love history, then I love having you here. Thank you so much, Trivet Gun. Okay, human decency does not derive from religion, it precedes it. So Sean making a very philosophical point, and a very strong philosophical point, and I appreciate everyone liking and subscribing. Yes, and we have also I have talked about that recently, the Yom Kippur War. Obviously, this is the Yom Kippur, the day of celebration for the Jewish people, where they supposedly atone for their sins. And it has developed historically, and it has led to the development of not just Jewish culture and Jewish religion over the centuries, but also the development of Western culture, because there is much in the West that is Judeo-Christian based. So, so the Yom Kippur War, which is being brought up in channel, that was a war that Israel fought that launched on Yom Kippur when Arabs and the Syrians in the northeast, as well as the Egyptians in the southwest, attacked Israel. At that time, Israel held on to the Sinai Peninsula, and they were able to repel the attacks during the Day of Atonement, but they were horribly outnumbered, and the war proved to be inconclusive. But once again, it's the third major war in the history of the nation of Israel. You have the Arab-Israeli War of 1948. You have the Six-Day War of 1966, where they had taken the Sinai Peninsula from Egypt. And then, of course, they have this war, the Yom Kippur War, where they take, where it's kind of inconclusive. And eventually it leads them to going to the table with Egypt, and Egypt recognizing Israel's right to exist in 1978 under President Anwar Sadat, thanks to the efforts of the recently turned 100-year-old Jimmy Carter. So, so it's a very important war. Almost 3,000 Israelis lost their life. Very difficult stuff. Yeah. So there's that occurrence, the Yom Kippur War, which obviously a lot of people are thinking about now because of October 7th. A lot of people are thinking about the safety and protection of the Jewish people and the nation of Israel, and also the safety of the Arab peoples and the Palestinians living in that region of the world and their rights due to the ongoing war between Israel, Hamas, and now Hezbollah and seemingly Iran. Everyone's getting involved there to one extent or another. So definitely one of the biggest parts of the development of Israel's culture is the development of Yom Kippur. And one of the biggest features of Jewish religion is the religion of Yom Kippur, because the Jewish temple, where sacrifices were done to provide atonement in ancient times, was destroyed by the Romans in 70 AD. This destruction of the Jewish temple for the second time, the original temple had been destroyed supposedly by the Babylonians in the 6th century BC, meant that there was no longer a place to do animal sacrifices to make atonement towards their god Adonai. So the Jewish people decided that it was a time to reshape and restructure their religion, and they did so throughout the 2nd century. And basically, the Jewish people, who eventually even lost the ability in many ways to live in the Roman province of Judea in the 2nd century AD. Another rebellion led to them being kicked out and exiled, and the land being renamed Palestine by the Emperor Hadrian. These Jewish people decided to rebuild and restructure their religion. How do they practice Judaism without the temple? How do they do sacrifices without the temple? How do they atone for their sins without the ability to sacrifice? Because they can't sacrifice if they don't have a priestly order, and they don't have a temple, and they don't have a homeland. And so through the centuries, over time, there was a development of a celebration of the Day of Atonement, which was already a Jewish holiday, in which they spiritualized the practice. Rather than doing actual sacrifices, they made atonement. They went to synagogues, they prayed, they sang songs, and they found ways and they read from the Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible. And this was all as an attempt to find an atonement for their sins. And in many Jewish customs and practices, this is the only day in which Jews can atone for their sins to God. So the development of the Jewish religion historically is shrouded around the end of the destruction of the temple by the Romans, the end of the Jewish ability to have their own state and their own homeland, and the spiritualization of their religion because of the destruction of the temple and the loss of the ability to sacrifices, and the loss of the ancient Jewish priesthood, which had followed them along the times of the Davidic kingdom, the Exodus, all of those different events. So this is also a time, Yom Kippur falls in the middle of, or at the very end of the High Holy Days, the Jewish New Year, Rosh Hashanah. It is, I believe, year 5784, something like that, in the Jewish calendar. And you have Rosh Hashanah, then you have, which is the Jewish New Year, followed by Yom Kippur. Then you have a celebration of the Tabernacles, known as Sukkot, which follows immediately afterwards, all wrapping up with the celebration Simchat Torah, which last year, October 7th, was on Simchat Torah, and it was then when they were targeted and attacked, the Israelis were, by Hamas. So just a little bit of Jewish religion and history there. But what's fascinating to me as a historian isn't so much the religious aspect of it, although that's quite interesting in its own right, but the fact of the matter that the Jewish religion was forced to adapt and change because of their historical predicament, because of their loss of their land, because of the destruction of a second Jewish temple. Jewish rebellions against the Babylonians had pushed Nebuchadnezzar the Great to destroy the Jewish temple and to bring into exile many Jewish captives. Of course, these events are in the Hebrew Bible and the Old Testament. Depending on who you think, what you think, they might be true, they might be exaggerated, they might not be true at all. But there is a development of a group of Jews living in Babylon during the 6th century BCE, as far as we know, and there is a continual development of the Jewish religion and a readjustment of the Jewish religion. They go back to their homeland after they were in exile. They rebuild the temple under Cyrus the Great, who allows them to return, the Persian emperor, and they build the second temple. This temple was renovated by King Herod the Great, who was the king at the time of the birth of Christ. This Herod supposedly killed off all the young children, according to the story of Christmas, forcing the young Jesus to flee into Egypt with his family. However, these renovations for the temple were short-lived because another Jewish rebellion in the 60s AD led the Roman general the Roman general Vespasian, who would become emperor. As a result of this, he would rally the legions of the East and be able to take over the Roman Empire to make war with the Jews and try to put down the revolt. And when he went to become emperor, he put his son Titus in charge. And in 69 AD, 68 or 69, I'm trying to remember the exact year, Titus destroys the Jewish temple. Or it's even 70. It's around that time Titus destroys the Jewish temple, and the Jewish religion is forced to change because they have once again lost their center of worship. 65 years later, a man named Bar Kokhba believes he is the Messiah, that he will deliver the Jewish people from their oppressors, the Romans, and he raises a revolt. The Roman Emperor Hadrian puts it down, and he's so tired of Jewish revolts, which plagued obviously the empire during the time of Vespasian and now plagues him again, that he decides to strip them of their land, rename Jerusalem, rename Israel. He gives it the name Palestine. And basically the Jews lose and many Jews are scattered all around the world. And of course, there is not a Jewish homeland in the Levant, in the region of Palestine, until the 20th century. So because of this loss of land, because of this loss of identity, because of this loss of center of worship, Jewish culture and religion has to adjust. And I believe it was the Council of Jamnia in the 2nd century where they basically decide this is how we are going to worship. And that worship involves Yom Kippur becoming the most important religious holiday in the Jewish religion, but also a center of time where the Jews are able to atone for their sins without using sacrifices or a temple. So, like all religions, the Jewish religion has changed quite a great deal, but it's history that has led to these changes in many, many instances. But yeah, it's going to catch up on the chat now, but if you like what you just heard and you like learning a little bit about Yom Kippur and you like learning about ancient history, then be sure to like and subscribe. That's how you become part of the Friendly Neighborhood Historian Army. I'm trying to reach 5,000 subscribers by the end of the year, and I'm bringing you daily historical content of different topics. I'm currently doing a series on powerful women rulers. I typically do shorts, but I do some longer form content as well, so check that out. If you're enjoying what you like to hear, like and subscribe. And this is our weekly Q&A where you get to ask me anything you want to about history, any social science topic that comes to your mind. I'm here to serve you guys. I'm here to give back. You guys watch my videos during the week. I answer your questions during the weekend. It just fits very well. Let me see here. Let me see. Catching up. Hello, welcome. Thank you for coming. Who do I think is right? Yeah, I don't know who's right. I don't know what you mean by that. Okay. Yes, Running Man. In a way, the Jews are still waiting. Some Jews believe in the Messiah. A lot of Jews do not. Some Orthodox Jewish communities, the ultra-traditional Jews, believe in a Messiah. Some Jewish groups that are more liberal, like the conservative and reform Jewish movements, are not waiting for the Messiah, but they still follow Jewish law. They still follow the Day of Atonement and things like that. Let's see here. Can you explain the marriage of 3-year-old to a Gentile like me? The marriage of a 3-year-old. What are you referring to, Timiya? I don't know what you mean. Anyways, wow, 3:44 in the morning. I love it. People tuning in from all over the world. I had one guy come in from India one time and said he couldn't sleep, and I'm sure I put him to sleep very quickly. I don't know what those tablets are, Willie. Um, Kevin's asking a great question. Tell me about the American history. What is your opinion on the Chinese Exclusion Act? So basically, the United States has kind of had this checkered past when it comes to immigration and how they deal with many immigrants. America has been built by immigrants, by settlers, by people fleeing religious persecution, looking for economic opportunities, and looking for a fresh new start. And America is kind of this thing where it's very, very capricious about when is too many. So imagine somebody pouring water into a glass, and imagine that is a symbol of immigration to the United States. The American government and the American people love the water in their glass, but they're very quick to say when and stop it as soon as they possibly can. And they basically believe and have come to believe in many ways that immigrants, be they white or Asian or Jewish, there's a huge amount of Jewish immigrants to America. That's why we were talking about Yom Kippur a little bit. And that's why people in the West are celebrating Yom Kippur even right now. But basically, Americans on both sides throughout the entire country, at many points and at many times, have basically said they don't want any more immigrants. They believe the immigrants are trying to take their jobs, trying to ruin their culture, that they're godless heathens. There was great hatred of Italian and Irish immigrants because they were Catholics. These same Irish immigrants who oftentimes move west to avoid the discrimination in big eastern cities like New York and Philadelphia and Chicago in the middle of the 19th century would oftentimes go to the west, to San Francisco, to Los Angeles, and start mistreating Chinese immigrants. And Chinese immigrants were seen as particularly different because they're ethnically different. They were not Caucasian, and because they were not ostensibly Christian. And so basically, there are immigration quotas that America puts in play in the late 19th and early 20th century that targets different immigrant groups, and some of them specifically target groups. And the most famous or infamous example of this is the Chinese Exclusion Acts, where the American government basically says, we don't want any more Chinese coming into this country. And so they shut it down until the middle of the 1960s. There was also a gentleman's agreement that kept Chinese immigrants from coming in. So there were these very nativist ideas, believing that immigrants were different, that they would bring a different culture, and then that would ruin whatever American culture happened to be at the time, and that they were taking jobs. So narratives about immigrants stealing jobs, ruining culture, and committing crime, those are not new. Those have existed for a long time throughout American history. It's a common knee-jerk reaction when the native culture, which really isn't native, but at this point, it's an Angloid American culture, is challenged by new groups bringing different religions, ethnic practices, and cultural identities. So my opinion of the Chinese Exclusion Act is that it was a terrible thing, obviously, to exclude people of Chinese descent from coming to the United States when many of them had already made a huge impact. Many Chinese immigrants worked hard to create their own communities in places like San Francisco and Los Angeles and throughout the West. Obviously, they had and these communities became known as Chinatowns. Angel Island in San Francisco was the equivalent of Ellis Island in the western part of the United States, and welcoming in Chinese, Japanese, and other immigrants from East Asia. And so it's a very sad and horrible moment, basically where the United States, just based on racism, based on fear, shuts off immigration of a group that had greatly contributed to the United States. The Chinese not only built their own lives and societies here, but they also experiencing horrible discrimination, low wages, mistreatment because they were different, all of these things. But they had also helped the United States construct many of its railroads, especially in the western part of the United States. And there was actually efforts in the middle of the 19th century to get large numbers of Chinese immigrants to come here because their own country was suffering. The Qing dynasty was in decline, and there was an overextended influence of the British and the French, who were kind of starving the Chinese through an extractive economy. And so the United States tries to appeal to Chinese immigrants to bring them in, and the argument is they can build the railroads because they built the Great Wall of China. So even the idea of bringing them in was at first very racially undertoned, and then their behavior towards them when they were here was racially undertoned, and then eventually they shut off their ports of entry. So Kevin, to answer your question, I think it's a really terrible thing, and it's a sad chapter in American history. And it's not uncommon for other cultures and countries to do this as well, and to fear foreigners as being dangerous and destructive. No, I have never heard of Wu Zaitin. Let me see. Hello, welcome. Bolu? I hope I'm saying that right. Your views on U.S. military industrial. Yeah, I don't know about public welfare schemes, but definitely there's this fear amongst a lot of Americans that there is a military industrial complex that controls everything and runs everything and handles and controls businesses and influences politicians and the American government to always be ready to go to war, and that it is has become kind of this monster that is dangerous to control, and that it basically influences public policy. And this was warned about by President Dwight Eisenhower, who was a general who had served in the military industrial complex, who became president and helped build it up. He believed that overarming America with nuclear weapons and building huge amounts of weapons and arms through the military industrial complex would only make it more and more powerful, in America and the American people weaker and weaker. So there's some history about that. Let's see here. Timaya is asking about the Talmud. What about the Talmud? The Talmud is a there's several different Talmuds, but the Talmud is a series of commentaries by Jewish rabbis and scholars on the Torah, and it's a way to understand the laws of Moses, and it is also part of that development of Jewish culture and religion following the laws of the Second Temple. Hello, welcome from Puerto Rico. That's awesome. And we've got people from Chicago, from London. Welcome from wherever you are. I'm so glad you're joining us in our live stream for the Friendly Neighborhood History channel. If you like and subscribe, you are officially a Friendly Neighborhood Historian. It's that simple. You don't have to give me a bunch of money. You don't have to do any of that. Just help me grow the channel and get the word out, because I love bringing historical information and content to as many people as possible. And if you love historical content and you love learning about history and social sciences, like and subscribe. And anything you want to talk about, this is our weekly Q&A, anything you want to ask social science related, drop it in the chat and I will get to it. Right now we've got a lot of people and it's really great to see so many people. And so I'm really enjoying all the questions. I like the space in your front teeth. Thank you, I appreciate that. People say I can put a debit card through it, and I always say Master or Visa. Welcome. 4 a.m. in India, and you can't sleep, so you're listening to me. That's your punishment. I'm sorry to hear that. Can you, okay. Let's see here. Hello, welcome, Cyrus. A lot of people wonder where I am from. I try to be as indiscreet about that as possible. I don't give out a lot of personal details about myself. I don't even take up the moniker Friendly Neighborhood Historian. That's you guys liking and subscribing and following the channel. But as many people can probably tell, I'm from the United States, but I'm not going to be specific about where. I leave people guessing, and some people have some interesting ideas. That's not fully true, Jao. Jao says the U.S. never had any problem with German, Austrian, Scandinavian immigrants. German immigrants show up first. There's kind of this first come, first served, and they're able to do well. But the German immigrants have to learn English. They're kind of discriminated against because they don't know English, and they're kind of pushed out of the East, and a lot of them settle in the Midwest and other places. Scandinavian immigrants, the same thing. That's why a lot of the Midwest is settled by people from Scandinavia, Austria, and Germany. That's why you have the Minnesota Vikings as a football team that is based on the ancestral, the fact that there many Swedish immigrants came to Minnesota. There's a lot of German immigrants settling in Pennsylvania, and a lot of them even make their way down to Texas. So there's problems of learning English, and German immigrants are particularly treated pretty harshly during World War I and things like that. German descended people, and they're not picked on nearly as badly or discriminated nearly as badly as the Japanese would be in World War II with the internment camps for Japanese Americans. But there is this level of discrimination towards them. So every immigrant group, to one extent or another, that came to the United States, which it's almost an interesting case study because you have immigrants going all over the place, all over the world, but the United States is seemingly this place where immigrants from every single country come. And without fail, they've experienced some level of difficult hardship. Yes, Simon the Bunny's asking, does Christopher the Columbus have a holiday in the United States? Well, that is one of the topics I wanted to get to, was the celebration of Columbus Day. A lot of people still think of the second week, Monday in October, as Columbus Day. And today is actually the anniversary, October 12th, of when Columbus first spotted the Bahama island, San Salvador in the Bahamas, probably from the Pinta. He had the Pinta, Nina, and Santa Maria, his 3 ships. Basically, a lot of people don't think that Columbus Day is a holiday worth celebrating anymore. They have a lot of objections to it, and that's because of Columbus and the Europeans who followed him and their history of giving disease, death, destruction, enslavement, and rape to the Native Americans. That's a huge, huge problem, and a lot of people see Columbus as a historical victim, as a historical villain because of that. And rather than celebrate him, they want to celebrate the indigenous peoples. So there's obviously a case to be made that indigenous peoples need to be celebrated, and their history and their culture is fascinating. But that's not something you can celebrate in only one day, because the Native Americans were an extremely diverse group of people with extremely diverse views, beliefs, and practices. And and to say all Native Americans are the same or should be celebrated is like saying every single person from Asia is the same and should be celebrated. No, there's a lot of diversity within the Native American groups, and Native Americans in the eastern part of what became the United States are monumentally different from First Nations people in Canada. So the fact of the matter is, I am of the opinion that there should be two separate celebrations, one for Columbus and for all the discoveries and exploration of the New World, because that was an incredible feat. It did change the world forever. It did help create the United States and South America and Central America. And also, of course, there should be a longer celebration of the natives and their culture and their different practices. To replace Columbus Day with Indigenous Peoples Day is interesting, because it's basically the cornerstone. The core of that was celebrating Columbus, and now it's kind of, I find, patronizing to say that celebration belongs to Native Americans when the Native Americans were horribly mistreated by Columbus. So why celebrate Native Americans on that day when that day represents a lot of terrible things that happened to them? Incidentally, coincidentally, accidentally, because of Columbus landing when he did in 1492. So Columbus Day is actually a holiday created to help end discrimination. It was created by the U.S. government in the late 19th century as a way to celebrate Italian heritage and culture when Italian immigrants, once again an immigrant group, were being harshly mistreated and discriminated against. The American government, in order to glorify Italians and to show them some love when they were going through a hard time, created Columbus Day, and it became a celebration all throughout America. So it's a way to actually acknowledge Italian Americans, their contributions to the American story, and it starts with the first Italian ever to show up in the Americas, and that's Christopher Columbus. So I think that there's obviously some room to celebrate it and to acknowledge Italian heritage and culture and Columbus's part in that, and his connection and the Italian connection to the United States, to the Americas, without necessarily shafting the Native Americans, because their celebration probably deserves more, because there's so much about their culture that's quite fascinating. So I did want to talk about that, and I finally got to that. Do you love Kurds? Yes. The Kurdish people? Yes. I love all people. Arya is asking, I know many Indian immigrants are leaving in America. If any of them try to destroy their land. Yes, there's many immigrants in America come to the United States and do a lot of great things, and it's the bad apples who kind of give everyone the bad reputation, and that's really just totally unfair. Interesting. Hi, welcome. I hope you're still here, MH, but this is the Friendly Neighborhood History weekly Q&A live stream where we talk anything social science related. If you have any social science topics, history, that you want to, social studies, geography, if you want to drop it in the chat, I will get to it in a timely manner. We've got a lot of people in chat, so we've got a lot of questions coming up. But basically, every Saturday and Sunday, we are here talking about history stuff, talking about social sciences, people asking questions about different topics that they are interested in. I will be here. I am here today and for another half hour at least, and then I will be back tomorrow at 4 p.m. So this stream is about history, but it's about history that you want to talk about. So if you have anything, drop it in the chat. Let's see here. So someone is asking about Trump or Harris. So I'm not going to give my political opinions. I try to be as objectively fair about geopolitics as possible. But I realized earlier in July that this election in the United States is an extremely historic election, especially when I saw President Biden drop out of the race, which hasn't happened to a sitting president running for a second term for 56 years. And it rarely happens at all. It's basically unheard of in modern American politics. And so I realized that rather than wait till it became officially history, to reemphasize the idea that history is an ongoing thing that happens before us, I have actually done several, I do several videos on it, I've done several commentaries on the political election, and every week I provide an update about what's going on in the U.S. elections. and I try to be as fair and objective as possible. So I'm not going to say who I'm going to vote for. I might make one of those maps where people predict how it's going to play out the election, but I'm not specifically supporting one side or the other. This channel is going to remain neutral, as objective as possible, because that's the job of a historian. And I've been called a right-wing bigot and a left-wing nut job, so I think I'm doing a pretty good job at being fair and balanced. Thank you. I really appreciate that. I appreciate you. So, yes, I'm ready, Joey. Are you ready? Let me see here. Thank you. I really appreciate that. Where are you from? I'm new here. Welcome. I hope you're still here, Ottoman, but we are from the United States, and we are bringing you some friendly neighborhood history. And if you like and subscribe, you can become a friendly neighborhood historian. It's easy as that. Well, thank you. Welcome, Paul. I love that you're from Ireland. I love that you're here. Ireland has so much wonderful history. We talked a lot about Irish immigrants and things like that. The main reason for the Irish actually coming to the United States in huge numbers in the middle of the 19th century is because of the Irish potato famine, which might be the first man-made famine in human history, where the British, because they were potato famines in Ireland were intensified because the British basically continued to extract potatoes for their own population while forcing the Irish to basically eat nothing, and many of them starved to death, leading to many leaving for the United States. So it might be the first man-made famine and perhaps targeted genocide in human history. So Ireland's got a lot of amazing history, a lot of connections, a lot of powerful stuff going on there. Hello, welcome. Thank you for coming. Yeah, Simon, you might be right about that. Simon's saying that it was his last voyage that was the most significant. Columbus makes 4 voyages, and the 4th one is the one where he actually touches down in the New World. The first one, he goes to the Bahamas. The second one, he goes to the island of Hispaniola, which we now know as the Dominican Republic and Haiti. The third one, he lands in Cuba, which becomes a huge center of Spanish location and business with sugar and tobacco. The 4th one, he actually lands in the New World itself, North and South America, on inland in South America, that becomes known as Columbia after him. So that might be his most important voyage. A New Beginnings asking, was Columbus Jewish? I've heard that rumor before. He was a Genoese merchant. He had gone to the Portuguese and asked them to let him sail the ocean blue. And Columbus's idea of sailing the ocean blue wasn't because he wanted to prove the earth was round. Intellectual people back then knew the earth was round. The monarchs, the church, everyone believed that the earth was round. Columbus had this idea that the earth was a lot smaller than it was, so he felt that if he went west, he could find a quick passage to India. And this is something that Europeans, English, French, Portuguese, Spanish, and Dutch would be doing for centuries, trying to find quicker ways to get to China, India, and Japan. And basically, the Portuguese already knew that if you went east, you would hit India. Columbus thought that if he went west, he would hit India. He was right, but he was wrong about how long it would take. A common misconception, too, that I've even had is that because he lands in the West Indies and because he thinks he's in India, he calls the natives Indians. That's probably not true. It's probably more that he referred to them as un gente indios in Spanish in his diary, a people in God, indios, Indian, and then we get the root word indigenous, Indigenous Peoples Day. There you go. India was referred to by many Europeans as Hindustan, the land, stan is land, the land of, like Afghanistan is the land of the Afghans, Hindustan, the land of the Hindus. In fact, many people in India do not want to even be called India anymore. They are thinking of changing the name of their country back to Bharat. The name India comes from the Indus River civilization, which is the first active civilization in the ancient world in the Indian subcontinent, and that was actually technically in Pakistan. So because of the divisions and the and the hostile nature between the Indians and the Pakistanis today, which is probably the fault of the British, who divided the Indian subcontinent into 3 different countries, Bangladesh in the east, India, and Pakistan. The Indian people are thinking of, in a spirit of nationalist fervor, are thinking of changing their name back to a more ancient title rather than just India. So interesting stuff. Thank you for subscribing. I really appreciate that. And you are now officially a friendly neighborhood historian. I hope you feel good about that. I've got the most incredible, yeah, you're trying to make me look. I actually have brown eyes, but thank you. What's my favorite type of cheese? Well, that's an easy one. Speaking of immigrants, a lot of immigrants in the United States made cheese. That's why we've got a lot of cheesemakers in Wisconsin, stuff like that. I was just talking about Scandinavian and German immigrants to America. But my favorite type, Swiss. If you just think Swiss is solid. Thank you. I appreciate that. Oh, Coke bottle. Nice job laying down the beats. Yeah, Cameron's asking a very interesting cultural question that's a little bit religious and historical. I don't know the actual historic reason for this, but if somebody's mother is Jewish, they are automatically Jewish, and they are likely to be raised culturally and religiously Jewish. If someone's dad is Jewish, so technically, ethnically, biologically, the person would be Jewish if their father's Jewish, but they would not have had, but that doesn't make them Jewish. Of course, getting a bar mitzvah, circumcision for males, things like that, that would make them Jewish, but they are not automatically Jewish. Judaism is passed down through the mother in the culture of the Jewish and in the development. I don't know the historical reason for that, but that is the religious and cultural practice of the Jewish people. Thank you. Thank you for that question, though. Let me see here. Okay. Learning English is a great idea. Yeah, TJ's talking about immigrants learning English. A huge way to walk the chasm and to make connections was to learn English for immigrants, and that became a huge way for them to get some cultural clout and currency in the United States. Different immigrant groups would learn English and assimilate over time. A general sociological trend was that the grandparents would come to the United States very poor. This is very stereotypical. It's not like this. This is a cookie cutter way to say it. It's not like this in every case. Obviously, there's exceptions. There's big exceptions. But generally, regardless of the immigrant group, you would have grandparents, the oldest generation coming, not knowing hardly any English, working really hard in menial labor so that their kids could get well educated. Those kids would grow up being encouraged to learn English and adapt to American culture. Those kids would become a little bit more successful. Maybe they'd be small business owners. Maybe they would pursue white collar work, not wanting to do the grunt work of their parents. And they would be more Americanized. And then their children would have a desire to learn the culture of their grandparents. So they would be bilingual, things like that. So actually, we know from reading, we know from psychology and evolutionary science that the best way for human beings to develop linguistically is actually to be bilingual. The more languages you learn, the more the higher your IQ tends to be, things like that. So I'm sorry, Paul. I guess we weren't on the same timeline for me to teach you, but I'm teaching you now, and you're teaching me things. People bring up topics all the time that I'm not aware of. So people always tell me interesting things about the history of the place they're from. So if you've got anything interesting about Irish history you want to share, be sure to drop in the chat. And that's what this live stream is here for. It's for you guys to give back and get your questions answered. So if you have anything you want to ask about social science or history related, drop it in the chat, and I will be sure to answer it. If you're enjoying what you're learning about, again, like and subscribe. Europeans don't bathe. Yeah, I've been reading Shogun, and I find that a lot of Europeans never got the concept of bathing until more recent centuries, whereas other cultures were very big on bathing. This guy loves China. Yes, Chinese culture, history, very, very fascinating. And what Japan did in World War II. Obviously, I don't love what Japan did in World War II because World War II is very interesting when it comes to human rights abuses because, of course, you have a Holocaust, which obviously should never, ever be minimized. It's the most brutal, systematic killing perhaps in human history. It is absolutely awful and terrible. But a lot of people ignore what the other Axis powers did and their brutality and their savagery. The Italians used chemical weapons on the Ethiopians when they invaded Ethiopia in the 1930s. And the British responded by using chemical weapons against the Italians when they were trying to take back Ethiopia. And the Japanese did horrible things. They did experiments on human beings, similar to Mengele's experiments on Jews in the camps. The Japanese did similar things to Chinese prisoners of wars. It's called Unit 731. The Japanese also engaged in systematic destruction and violation of people, such as what happened at Nanjing in 1938, the death marches of Bataan. Japan was particularly cruel and harsh during World War II. And a lot of people don't know as much about it. A lot of people focus on the morality of the Allies and what they did, not focusing on the Japanese and what they were doing on the other side. Because a lot of people, unfortunately in the West, do not know a lot about the history of Asia and East Asia and what was happening in the Asian front of the war before the Pacific theater. Something that people don't notice is that China and Japan were actually already at war before Hitler invaded Poland. And in my opinion, World War II actually starts at the Marco Polo Bridge incident in 1937, where the Japanese provoked the Chinese into attacking them, which led to what's called the Second Sino-Japanese War, where the Chinese, who were in the middle of a revolution and a civil war between the communists and the nationalists, banded together to fight against the Japanese. And the Allies were actually helping them. The British, the French, and the Americans were helping people like Mao, who were resisting the Japanese in their occupation. So the truth of the matter is that the World War II probably starts with the Marco Polo Bridge incident in 1937, although it could have started at the Mutakin Bridge in 1931, when Japan affronted and insulted China by attacking the Mutakin Bridge and taking over Manchuria. It could have started in 1935 when Hitler invaded Ethiopia and toppled Haile Selassie from power. So there's a lot of different dates for World War II. A lot of people think 1939 is the obvious one because of Hitler invading Poland, but World War II was not just a European war, it was an Asian war, it was a world war. So anyways, let me see here. Is there any Irish in you? If you're asking me, yes, I have a little bit of Irish. I don't even know what's going on there. People are talking about Trump and politics. Just play on. Did the old Rome on the third to 7th century speak Latin or Greek? So if you're referring to the ancient Romans, the very earliest Romans developed their own Latin language, and obviously that separates them from the Greeks. But the Roman Empire, the Roman Empire spoke Latin, although there was a huge amount of Greek-speaking people, and the lingua franca was Greek. So the official language of the Roman Empire during its heyday was Latin, but the language of the West, the language of the empire that everybody seemed to speak and know, and this was how people connected, was Greek. When the empires were divided in the 4th century AD, the Eastern Roman Empire tended to speak Greek. The Western Roman Empire tended to speak Latin. And after the Western Roman Empire dissolved, the Eastern Roman Empire, which remained, which became known as the Byzantine Empire, they spoke Greek. So hopefully that answers your question, first name, last name. I'm trying to get to as many questions as possible. USA is a force of good in the world. Well, that depends on who you ask, and that's a very debatable historical question. The U.S. has done a lot of good, a lot of remarkable and unique good in world history, but it has also done a lot of horrible damage. And a case in point, talking about, look at the Middle East and things going on there. This is like a high school press. No one wants to. Yeah. Yeah, Simon the Bunny's asking, is it true that Columbus brought back syphilis to Europe? Syphilis becomes really rampant in the 16th century. I was just reading that it was rampant in England. It was called the Great Pox. So there's smallpox, which kills off people, but a lot of people were worried about getting the Great Pox, which was syphilis, interestingly enough. So it is true that a lot of venereal diseases that the Europeans did not have came from the natives. So there's this thing called Columbian Exchange. Not that Columbus specifically got syphilis from the natives, but the Europeans gave smallpox, yellow fever, and a bunch of diseases to the natives. And this is actually what killed off the natives more so than warfare, was disease. And Columbus and social diseases were brought back by the Europeans to Europe from the natives. So the Columbian Exchange included the influence of Christianity spreading amongst Central and North and South America and the Caribbean. It included the trading of goods and supplies. And it also included the trading of diseases. The Europeans bringing back social diseases like syphilis, and the Indians getting diseases that killed them off in systematic fashion. Okay. That's not quite true that the Europeans were cool with Indians until they became mercenaries. The truth of the matter is that Columbus, like many of the Europeans who landed in the New World, were at the mercy of the natives. Yes, they had guns, but the natives had far more people. The natives knew the land. The natives knew how to farm. The natives knew the crops. The Europeans didn't know any of this. They didn't show up there with the knowledge to do all of this. That's completely historically inaccurate. So the Plymouth, the first Thanksgiving, the Pilgrims who show up in Massachusetts from start New England, We're totally at the mercy of I believe it's the Algonquin Indians, and Massaquat and Squanto and people like that. So the natives held the Europeans within their mercy, but were often interested in trading and working with them and stuff like that. And it really wasn't until the diseases started to kill off the Native Americans at a rapid pace that the Europeans were able to get a stranglehold on them to one extent or another. So Cyrus is asking, what would the Kurds do in a possible Israeli-Iranian war? What is your opinion? I'm not sure what the Kurds would do. I don't know enough about the geopolitical situation there. All I know is that an Israeli-Iranian war could very well be like the Second Sino-Japanese War, which is a sign of a growing world conflict, because the United States would probably continue to back Israel. And if the United States made a show of strong military force against the Iranians, China and Russia might be persuaded to help the Iranians, but we don't know. Who established NASA? Keatsy is asking who established NASA. President Eisenhower established NASA in 1958, part of the building of that military-industrial complex. But basically, the space race was on in 1957 when the Soviet Union sent Sputnik, the first satellite, into space. A year later, they sent the first man, Yuri Gagarin, and the Americans were woefully behind. So Eisenhower decides to catch the Americans up by setting up NASA. And this was seen as as an important technological and cultural war between the United States and the Soviet Union, but it wasn't nearly as dangerous as nuclear holocaust or a giant land war, World War III. So basically, NASA and the space race was seen as a more gentlemanly competition between the two sides, and basically both sides were trying to outdo each other there too. Just like they did with weapons technology. The Soviet Union got the first man. They got the first animal. They got the first satellite. The United States catches up by getting the first man to orbit the moon. To orbit the Earth, John Glenn. And of course, the space race kind of ends with the United States pulling ahead at the last moment with the moon landing in 1969, which only provoked the Soviets to say it doesn't matter who gets to the moon, it matters who gets to Mars. And 60 years almost later, we're not there yet. So who established NASA? The United States did under President Eisenhower, all part of the way to undermine the Soviets. If you look at most American domestic policy from 1945 to 1989, it's all about stopping the Soviets to one extent or another. The interstate highway system in the United States is actually built not as a way to make transportation easier, although that's the way it was eventually used. It was a way to transport military supplies and soldiers should the Soviets actually invade the United States. So hope that answers your question. I hope you're still here. And if you're enjoying what I'm talking about and all the history I'm bouncing around with, because we've got so many different questions from so many wonderful people, like and subscribe. It helps the channel grow. And we're going to be doing more of this tomorrow at 4 p.m. Eastern time. I hope I can see you guys there. I'm half Indian. Yeah, David, India has a lot of history, and it's really a fascinating place. And it's actually, along with China and Mesopotamia, the oldest civilization in the world to one extent or another. Paul, am I able to do Irish on the history on the Irish? Absolutely. I've done a little bit of it. I talked about the Irish potato famine. So hopefully you enjoyed that. If you have any specific, put it in the chat. Okay, so I'm getting a lot of people who want to argue about politics. That's fine. MH is saying, I think Israel has done bad stuff, but I don't think Hamas should win. And the reason I'm going to address that is not because I'm going to get into the fray of the geopolitics, but I'm going to say what nation hasn't done bad stuff. The truth of the matter is a lot of people in history when they look at history, especially nowadays, want a clean slate. There are no clean slates. There's a lot of people doing a lot of crappy stuff to each other, and it's all over the place. And if you don't know about it, it's because you haven't studied the history, generally speaking. The fact of the matter is we talk about the Native American tribes, and they definitely deserve their own time of celebration, Indigenous Peoples Month or week, something like that, rather than just a day that is just a copycat of Columbus Day, the guy who enslaved them. A lot of them. But the Native Americans, many tribes were very warlike, very brutal. Some were cannibals. The Carib tribe that Columbus encountered is where we get the word cannibal from. And a lot of times very peaceful tribes like the Hopi of the time were abused and mistreated by oppressive, violent tribes. So that's just how history goes. And thank you for watching from Ireland. MH, that is what my thoughts are. This channel is about history, social sciences, and we're doing our weekly Q&A, so anything you want to drop, if you're still here, Filippo, be sure to do so. I don't know what you mean by that, Cyrus. I don't know what KK and YPJ are. Hello, welcome from Austria. Well, that's awesome. There's no winners in wars. Yeah, there are winners, and history is written by the victors in many instances. However, there are some people who do a little bit better, but yeah, at the end of the day, everyone suffers, and war is absolutely awful, and that's why World War One gets so much attention in history books, because World War One is this war where basically there doesn't seem to be a moral point. Yes, it changes a lot of the way the world is structured, but a lot of people die for almost no reason. Vikram is asking if World War III, what nexus would be formed and who will fire the first nukes? I don't know if there's going to be nukes used. I just think that that's just too existentially dangerous to be used when you consider how many thousands there are all over the world. But basically, the way World War III, if it forms, is forming, is similar to World War I. You have spheres of influence, and you have small powers fighting each other and bigger powers being interested. During World War I, the Austrians wanted to bully the Serbians because a Serbian had killed the heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne. This got Russia's attention, who wanted to protect the Serbs and keep the Austrians at bay. And this got the Germans involved, who wanted to show Russia up because they were worried Russia was getting too powerful and too strong and had too many people. France had an alliance with Russia, so they were going to fight the Germans. And so the Germans wanted to really swing at both the French and the Russians. And to get to France at the beginning of the war, they went through Belgium. Again, a small player. But Belgium is eternally supposed to be neutral and is never supposed to be invaded. This was the agreement they made after Napoleon had been defeated a century before. When they were invaded and oppressed and occupied by the Germans, the British honored their agreement to protect Belgian neutrality and joined the war. So it's really just one large power after another kind of reacting to everything going on, and that's kind of how World War I starts, and that could be similar to everything. Yeah, I'm not going to go back to school, but thank you for that. I'm always learning, though. Richard says is asking about James Cook. James Cook, obviously the famous English explorer who discovered the Sandwich Islands and naming it after the Earl of Sandwich, which is where a legend and myth we get the sandwich from. Somebody else, and then he also, of course, discovers Hawaii. He runs into natives who are cannibals there and is killed by them. So, hello, hi, welcome, hi, Ryan. Hi, Veer. Yeah, that's hilarious, Stephen. Yeah, I don't believe in braces. I believe perfectly in braces. Yeah. Let me see here. A lot of people just kind of spamming at this point. Remember, this is a history channel. Ask about history stuff, and I will respond to it. That is the goal. That is what we do every Saturday and Sunday. Let me see. Thank you, Joe. I appreciate that. I don't know what is. Let me see here. Wheels is asking, what are we talking about? Whatever you want to talk about, whatever social science topic you want to bring up, I would be happy to talk about it with you. If you enjoy learning about history, like and subscribe, follow the channel for more of that. That's what we do. We are here every Saturday at 6 p.m. Eastern and Sunday at 4 p.m. Eastern. And Joe, I think I just answered what's going to happen there. And Anton Sup. Anonymous is asking, am I Jewish? No. Oh, this is interesting from Vikram. Are Jews basically Turks? No, they are Semitic peoples to one extent, meaning according to, they have a similar linguistic and ethnic background, just like the Arabs do. There's a lot of relations. In fact, they've done tests to show that Jews and Palestinians have a huge amount of DNA in common, a huge biological relation. They are very close in their biological relation. They are all part of the Semitic peoples who kind of inhabit southwestern Asia, the Near East, and the Middle East. And so there's a lot of connections there, but they are not Turks specifically. The Turks are referred to people who are from Turkey, but also who have migrated all over that entire area, Turkey and the crossroads of the Near East. So there's something there. Let's see. Yeah, Simon, that's a very good point. I assume the Jewish mother thing is because in the olden days there was no DNA test, so the father couldn't even be proven. Yeah, you couldn't necessarily prove it, but there's more cultural, historic, and religious reasons that I just don't know. So if anyone knows exactly why Jews are Jews because of their mothers, please let me know, because that's a really fascinating thing. Interesting, Joe. So but you live in Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico obviously was owned by the Spanish for a long time, the rich port. I don't believe Columbus ever landed there. I think the Spanish took it over in the middle of the 1500s. And was freed by the United States, kind of under new management, and made a territory in 1898 in the Spanish-American War, which is where the Spanish Empire ended and the American Empire began. Okay, let me see here. Oh, Alpha's asking, why are you doing what you're doing? I hope he's asking me that, not the spammers in the chat. I'm doing what I'm doing because I love history and I like people learning, and I like to share my knowledge with you and to learn from you guys and to answer questions. And it's a lot of fun. So, yeah. So let me see here. Yeah, I agree, Adam. I absolutely agree. Let's see here. Is Egypt? Let's see here. We've got Brown asking, is Egyptian as a topic okay? Yeah, of course. What do you want to know about Egyptian? Like the language, the culture, the of course, the ancient Egyptians and their history. I'm more than willing to talk about any and all of it. Okay. So let's see what else here. Let's go Trump. Happy birthday. It's not my birthday. Okay, so Joe's asking, what do you think will be the outcome of the Israeli conflict? Will history play a part? Yeah, I'm not sure what the outcome is. As far as I'm concerned, it could either be what I've been describing with a World War III scenario, where we get that kind of World War I repetition, where one side after another has to join in, and it just kind of dogpiles from there, or it will end very soon in a peaceful manner. Julian's saying America used nukes. Yes, the only country in the United States in the world to ever use nuclear weapons was the United States, and they used it twice. Let me see here. What would the Kurds do in a possible? Let me see. I think I answered that. Some people were asking because I've. Thank you, Alpha. I appreciate that. I think that's a compliment saying I'm an encyclopedia, not a historian. People saying I'm a walking encyclopedia. I take it. So Julian's saying an interesting point here. Philip's bringing up Marco Polo. I think he might be playing the game. He might be doing this from a pool, but nonetheless, mentioning the Marco Polo bridge. Marco Polo was a European explorer from Italy. I believe he was from Venice, and he actually charted a course through the Silk Road, connecting southwestern Asia with China, and eventually ended up there. So, some cool stuff there. And he actually went to the court of Kublai Khan. This is the Mongols. This is the Yuan dynasty, and he observed how rich they were, how powerful they were, and how much they did trading and stuff like that. So very interesting stuff. That's interesting. I did not know about that. In Indonesia, I know the Japanese attacked Indonesia. They attacked Papua New Guinea. They actually took over Indonesia and then gave it back to the Dutch, who gave independence to Sukarno. I think in 1947 or 46, but I did not know that they actually decapitated 300 Americans. I know about the death marches at Bataan. Yeah, the Japanese were pretty ruthless during the war. Americans need to pay compensation for using nukes. That's a very interesting topic, Julian. The fact of the matter is, I'm not going to necessarily give my opinion. The reason they didn't invade, the alternative might have been that the war continued. Japan really didn't want to surrender and had no designs to surrender. The United States did not trust the Soviets, especially with what they were doing in Eastern Europe. So they didn't want the Soviets help. They didn't want to rely on the Soviets to help them invade Japan. And an invasion of Japan probably would have led to a lot more casualties. So there's that too. Let me see. Oh, wow, that's amazing. They sunk 14 Nazi submarines, Joe Schmo. The Greenland Patrol. That's fascinating. I'll have to read more about that specifically because that's really, really cool. Okay, let me see here. Okay, Spartans. I'm not sure what's going on here. Yeah, that's really cool. Drop it in the chat. You got some fun history there. What war crimes did the United States commit in World War II? Daniel is asking. Well, I think the biggest obvious example of the Allies' misuse during World War II was the bombing of Dresden. That firebombing destroyed tons of life. It was a civilian target. It was the British getting back for the Germans bombing Britain and London during the early part of the war, and the United States kind of went along with it. Civilian targets were bombed indiscriminately throughout World War II, and basically this was the last war where civilian targets were prioritized. And it was a way to demoralize the Germans and get them to surrender. Hiroshima and Nagasaki weren't exactly civilian targets, but they were targets. And and they did have a lot of civilians in them. And I just heard somewhere that the Americans used leaflets and warned them about that. I'm not sure if that's true. I'll have to double check that. Thank you. I appreciate that. I know as much as I can. Yeah, Poland is not the first to fight because the Chinese were fighting the Japanese for a couple of years before then. Basically, in the Europeans' way, the Russians and the Germans agreed to divide Poland a week before the Germans rolled into Poland. And finally, Britain and France, who didn't want a repeat of World War I, hesitantly agreed to go back to war. Interesting. Thank you for that, DG. I'll have to watch that. When and why was the F sound in Philistine switched to the P sound? I don't know. That's just so the Philistines were a sea people who occupied the southwestern portion of the Levant area. In fact, they occupied the Gaza Strip, for instance, interestingly enough. And the Philistines were eventually kind of conquered and suppressed by, I think, the Assyrian Empire. And they were the main rivals in the Levant locally to the Israelites and the Hebrew people in the Old Testament, depending on how much of the Old Testament you want to believe. They were eventually wiped out, like I said. The name Palestine comes from Herodotus, who kind of switched it around. I think it's a Greek, a Hellenization, a making Greek of that name. Thank you, Julian. I really appreciate you subscribing. Tartaria. Are you asking about the Tartars, the Mongols who fought against the Russians? Interesting. Yeah, Joe's asking about the Israeli conflict a lot. Yeah, I think that that history will play a role in its demise. The history shows us that Israel has surprisingly beaten the odds every single time, and this war should be no exception. Obviously, that's just from a historical perspective. That doesn't mean the war is a good thing and needs to go on. Do not misquote me there. Thank you. I really appreciate all the compliments saying I'm knowledgeable and I know what I'm talking about. That makes up for all the jokes about my teeth. So thank you. Yeah, Dublin is bringing up the Romans brought stability in Celtic Britain, more law and order and rules. That's true. And people come into the channel all the time and tell me about them being in England and still being near the ruins of ancient Roman amphitheaters, palaces, city centers, stuff like that. So yes, there was a lot of stability brought by the Romans to Britannia that kind of falls apart. And for the next 600 years after the Romans fall apart, the island of Britain will be divided between different barbarian groups who kind of vying for power. And eventually the Vikings are going to get involved. The Anglo-Saxons are going to invade from northern Germany. And it's all going to culminate with the Normans, who are Scandinavians who have taken over the northern part of France, invading and conquering England under William the Conqueror in 1066. But England is kind of for 6.5 centuries thrown into this kind of this milieu of fighting amongst different barbarian and Viking and raider tribes trying to control their island after the Romans leave. And yes, Alpha, I'm happy to infect you with my intelligence. That sounds weird, though. Let me see. I'm trying to answer as much as I can. Let me see. Okay. Yeah, Melita is bringing up the Spanish flu. I talked about this on the channel last week. The Spanish flu is basically the influenza pandemic. It is the last global pandemic before COVID-19, and it literally happens a century before COVID-19, and it affects the early part of the 1920s, just like COVID has clearly affected the early part of the 2020s. People would get on trains fully healthy, going from one part of the United States to another, and would be dead by the time they reached their destination in just a few hours. That's how bad this disease was. And it's called the Spanish flu, not because it started in Spain, but because Spain, who wasn't censoring their newspapers in World War I because they were neutral, not involved, actually was the first to publish about the disease. But the disease probably came from the horrid conditions and the unsafe, unsanitary conditions of the war trenches along the Western Front in France. So, but Spain was the first country to publish about it, so it became known as the Spanish flu. So yeah, and that's not that far back. There was actually someone in Spain who got the Spanish flu when they were 2, lived to be 105, got COVID and survived both the Spanish flu and COVID. It was an amazing story. Let's see here. That's interesting. So hot chili peppers from Mexico, then Portuguese brought from, yeah, that makes sense. So there's this long-standing trade and exchange between the Europeans. So they take stuff from America, and they take it to Africa, and they take it to India and other parts of Asia. Yeah. No, I'm just in my house, but thank you for asking, El Guru. Who doesn't love grandmas? Thank you, Stephen. I'm glad that you're hooked. I'm glad that you subbed, and you are officially a friendly neighborhood historian. That's all you guys have to do to become a friendly neighborhood historian. You don't have to give me a lot of money. You don't have to do this. All you have to do is like and subscribe. Confederate Wolf is asking, do you know anything about the Scottish? Because, yeah, I know a lot about the Scottish. I love Scottish history. I had often thought, like a lot of people, I think, I'll just share this one tidbit, that Macbeth was just made up, but it is actually a historical play. A lot of people, the tragedy of Macbeth is one of the most well-known of Shakespeare's plays. It's probably the most bloody, and you're never supposed to yell Macbeth in a crowded theater. I don't know the exact reason for that, but Macbeth was actually a real Scottish king who was an illegitimate child, who did overthrow, who did not kill I think it was Malcolm, or Duncan. I'm trying to remember who was the king and who was the son. He did not kill King Duncan. King Duncan died, he took over, and he was eventually killed by King Malcolm. So a little bit of Scottish history, Macbeth is actually a true story, believe it or not. Yeah, Prolbens, you're right. Yeah, Israel is doing a lot of, it's a terrible war, and war is a terrible thing, and children are dying, and that needs to stop ASAP, and it's awful what Israel's doing there. What is my least favorite race? I'm just not answering. Someone's bringing up Iceland. Do they want to know about the history of Iceland? I actually don't know that much about Iceland, other than the Reykjavik conference between Reagan and Gorbachev in the 1980s to help in the use of nuclear weapons and stuff like that. I also, let me see. Iceland, obviously, I think settled by Eric the Red, is a Viking stronghold. Basically, the Vikings were not just conquerors and warriors. Vikingur means raider. It's an ancient Saxon word. But also, many of them were farmers who were looking for new lands. Many of them were travelers and explorers. And 500 years before Columbus, most likely Leif Erikson lands in America in, I believe it's Newfoundland. Newfoundland, yeah. Let me see here. Can you be my wife? Yeah, sure. I don't have any plans. Interesting. I don't know much about African Americans in Toronto, Louisiana, but I'm willing to learn about that. So tell me a little bit more about that. You guys always bring up stuff that I'm learning about, so I really appreciate that. I don't know who said that, Joe. Thank you, Paul. I really appreciate that. And you're from Ireland, another wonderful person from Ireland, another wonderful person from a wonderful country. Yeah, the British made a treaty with Belgium, Dublin, but it was actually all the Europeans. Belgium didn't exist. Belgium is actually a relatively new European state. It's created as a buffer zone between Germany and France because of the Napoleonic Wars, and it's taken from the Netherlands. In fact, I think it was once called the Spanish Netherlands because the Spanish had occupied, no, the Austrian Netherlands, because the Austrians had occupied that. Magellan got kicked in the, yeah, that's hilarious. Okay. Daniel's asking a great question that a lot of people ask on the channel that I really appreciate. Is America an empire? Not in the classic sense of a land empire like the Mongols or the British or the Romans. America is probably an empire through influence and hegemonic power, economic, social, political, stuff like that. So, I mean, to call it an empire is to change the meaning of the word empire, but definitely when you consider the British and their hegemony over places that they did not control, like China, and things like that, you could say America, and you can call that an empire. You can call America an empire as well. Yeah, I'm okay with the trolls, Paul. I just like hearing from you guys. I'll have to figure out how to do that. Magellan did not get killed in the Philippines. At least I don't believe so. Magellan died sailing back around the world. You might be confusing that with James Cook, who was killed and eaten by savages in Hawaii. Sorry, I didn't mean to say savages. Yeah, Trivium. I've heard a little bit about this dancing plague of 1518 in Strasbourg, where people were literally, it was almost probably epilepsy, stuff like that. There was another sickness that was really common in that time called the sweating sickness, and there's these occasional diseases that kind of die away that we don't know about, and we don't know what actually caused them, but people would react in very strange ways. Obviously, sweating was a huge part of the sweating sickness. and that swept through England. It kills the brother of King Henry VIII, and it allows him to become king after his father Henry VII dies. Yeah. Rob, I don't know about if that's true or not. I think I'm in the right on that one. But yeah, so Dublin, there. Let me see here. So trivia, that's what I know about the dancing plague. Not too much, but a little bit. Dublin is asking, unfortunately, the British honored that treaty for Belgium to defend their Catholic king fighting a German Catholic Kaiser. Yeah, so they honor their treaty with the Belgians. It doesn't really, and that shows you by the 20th century how little religion has to do with it. It's not about religion, it's about defeating the Germans. And of course, Britain is probably worried about this. Britain, throughout most of the 19th century, wants to do empire building, and it doesn't want to be involved with the conflicts in Europe, particularly the mainland conflicts between France, Germany, and Russia. But it's obviously the fear of a growing and powerful German empire does threaten Britain's domestic and international power. And so I don't think it's just the Belgians that get them into the war. They're also kind of friendly with the French by this point, despite fighting them and wanting to destroy them for centuries. During the 19th century, Britain kind of makes peace with the French and with the Americans. Julian's asking, UAP, I don't know what UAP are. Alfeo is asking, honest question, why were the... Oh, yeah. Oh, wow, that's a great question, Alfeo. Honest question, why were the Jews targeted by Germans when they lived side by side? It doesn't really explain it in the books. So they did live side by side, but the Germans, the French, the British, most Europeans had a horrible, horrible legacy of anti-Semitism, born partially out of their need to scapegoat and blame someone for their problems, and also blame because the Roman Catholic Church not wanting to associate itself with the Roman Empire and not wanting the Roman Empire to be responsible for the death of Jesus kind of pinned it on in the Middle Ages on the Jews. So because the Jews had killed Christ, because the Jews were not getting sick during the Black Plague because they knew how to wash their hands and remain sanitary and quarantine, throughout European history, throughout the Middle Ages, the Jews were often targeted by the Europeans. So the Nazis don't just wake up targeting Jews out of nowhere. Martin Luther, the German reformer, writes his last religious book is called The Jews and Their Lies. He says horrible things about the Jewish people. He says that their synagogues and businesses need to be burned and destroyed. So the truth of the matter is they'd already been targeted. There was Hitler himself was living in, I believe it was Vienna. There was an extremely anti-Semitic mayor in Vienna who helped stir him and others up to anti-Semitism long before he joined the Nazi Party. Anti-Semitism was an unfortunate and awful reality of the time, and it didn't just come out of nowhere. Mass hysteria just takes over, and it goes to levels that never had possibly been before. But the English, the French, the Spanish, they had all kicked the Jews out of their land. They had all persecuted the Jews. Many Jews died in the Spanish Inquisition. So they did live side by side. It's the effect. There's a psychological effect of mass hysteria where you can get people to demonize and turn on somebody and just follow orders all the way until you're systematically killing millions of people. It can't really explain it in the books because it's just it's social, moral. It's beyond the history almost at that point. But that's such a fantastic question, Alfeo, about the Holocaust. How could this happen? It didn't happen out of nowhere. It took time. It didn't, and a lot of people point this out. It's almost trite to say it, but it didn't start overnight. It didn't start with them saying, yeah, let's round up Jews and kill them. It started with, we need someone to blame for our failures in World War I. We need someone to blame for the economic downturn of the Great Depression. We need someone to blame for the fact that Germany was once this great empire, and now it's basically it's being slapped around by France and Britain and forced to pay these horrible debts. Who do we blame? Well, let's blame people who are not like us, who historically have not been like us. And there are two reasons for, there are many reasons, but there are two reasons for why the Jews are a group unto themselves. One, the refusal to assimilate in Europe. Ashkenazi Jews' refusal to become Christian, obviously, is a huge part of that. And so that makes them an easy scapegoat by a Christian majority nation. At the same time, they are also remarkably efficient, successful, well-educated, and skilled. And so that has made them a target of both envy and malice. So I know that's a heavy, heavy topic, but it's just such a great question. I had to answer it. So there's several reasons, and there's no one honest, complete reason. Yeah, I don't know why someone saying that Jesus did not exist. Jesus definitely did exist. There was a man named Jesus of Nazareth. In fact, when you listen to me on channel, I do not say Jesus Christ. Christ is a title. That's affirming him as the Messiah. I'm not a religious channel. I'm not going to talk about my own religious convictions, whatever they may be. But Jesus of Nazareth, or Rabbi Yeshua, as the Jews, as he would have been known, was there the historic, wherever you believe he's God, the Messiah, whatever you believe about him, whether you believe he's coming back or not, or he rose from the dead, the truth of the matter is that the evidence, it's almost historically dishonest to say he did not exist. He certainly did exist. You have secular authorities referring to him. You have this sect of Judaism emerging that the Romans are soon going to turn their attention to, because they are dying for this Messiah figure. They just happen to believe that Jesus of Nazareth is that Messiah. So, yeah, Simon, I'm definitely down for that. You don't have to be here every weekend. My wonderful moderator was not able to was not able to be here today and put my social media handles. But on Facebook, it's Friendly Neighborhood History. You guys can look me up on Instagram and X as well for that, by the way. So I'm on social media. And if you've enjoyed what we've been going over for the last hour and 15 minutes, like and subscribe. I'm going to wrap up soon. I'm trying to catch up on the comments. But yeah, thank you for helping there, Simon. But yes, let's see. Historical evidence for Jesus. Is he engaging with YouTube or another platform? I don't know. Dublin, what are you referring to? Americans did the same with the Philippines. NYC, chapstick, but I need both. There was one video I made where people were commenting that I clearly have really bad chapped lips in that video. And since they weren't paying attention to the history, I made a video later that night, since they're so darn focused on chapstick. That video was all about the history of chapstick. So, hello from Syria. Welcome, Sarah. About Levant, something interesting about the Levant. Well, I'm trying to remember where the term Levant comes from. I believe it's a British term. But basically, the Levant is the region between, in the southwestern portion of Asia, the Near East, as it used to be called, and it is the far western part of the Middle East, with where Israel, Jordan, the Palestinians, Lebanon, and Syria are. And so, most recently, the term Levant has been used a lot to refer to ISIS, because the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria also refer to themselves as ISIL, the Islamic State of Israel or of Iraq and the Levant. Andrew, the oldest Bible. So you're probably referring to the Septuagint, which is the ancient Greek translation of the Bible, but the Bible, the Old Testament was written in the Hebrew Bible was written in Hebrew. Wheat came from Egypt. Absolutely, yeah. Wheat definitely comes from Egypt. Let me see here. What do you say to people that say black people were the? Yeah, that's interesting. Poker Man is asking, what do you say to people who say black people were the natives here when Christopher Columbus, not the Native Americans that we know today? I react the same way as when I hear people from the Church of Jesus Christ of the Latter-day Saints, the Mormons, say that Israelites are the ancient inhabitants of the Americas. Not true. Africans and African Americans have had a huge contribution to the history of Central, South, and North America and the Caribbean. It's indisputable. It's incredible. It's amazing how they overcame such horrible oppression to have such amazing contributions. But they have nothing. But they are not the native inhabitants of this land. Neither are white people. Columbus landed here in 1493. Well, he had 4 different trips. So one's in 1492. He goes back. He comes back 1494, 1498, and 1501. And he died believing in, I think, 1502, believing he had landed in India the whole darn time. It was Amerigo Vespucci, another Italian, who disproved him, as many of the great explorers and adventurers of that time were Venetian, who were known for their sea trade and their sea travel. Many of the great explorers were either Portuguese or Italian, but Amerigo Vespucci disproved that it was India, proving that it was, in fact, not India, but the New World, and that's why it's called North and South America, not North and South Colombia. Bikini Atoll. Yeah, I think yeah, it's interesting. The Bikini actually is named after a testing site of a nuclear weapon. Believe it or not, the Bikini, yes, the Bikini women wear was a French site where they created the swimwear, but it was also where a nuclear test went horribly wrong for the French. Interesting. Are my parents from the Ukraine? No. Yes, that's true, Rob. They were the only country to use them during war. but nuclear tests were common. And yes, Britain had Operation Hurricane, where they tested nuclear weapons off the coast of Australia. The Soviets obviously had it. China has it. India got the nuclear weapons. So yes, of course, using them in warfare is what I meant. I don't know about that black powder. I'm just not sure of where they came from. Let me see. Oh, Alfeo is asking another great question. Why does the U.S. back Israel so much? There's several reasons for that. One is the history. The creation of a state of Israel is mainly because as is a response, at least from the Europeans, to the horrors of the Holocaust. Basically, seeing that Jews need a place to stay on their own and not be bothered, and where they can avoid continual anti-Semitic persecution. From the Israelis' perspective, that was their homeland. And so they had several different options of where to go to escape persecution. Many of them came to the United States, and they had many options of creating their own homeland. But throughout the 19th century, there was a movement called nationalism. And nationalism affects people in Italy, it affects people in Germany, and all throughout, and the Balkans, they get their independence. The Greeks get their independence from the Ottoman Empire and become their own country. These different efforts at nationalism, of national independence, and the spirit of we are one people, we deserve one country and one state where we can speak our language, practice our religion, and share our culture, that comes to the Jews. And the Jews, who are horribly persecuted throughout most of Europe, and who decide, many of them, to return to Israel starting in the late 19th century. And so that leads to the creation of it's called Zionism. Theodor Herzl was one of the founders of it. And eventually, over time, they basically decide that Israel will become its own country. The UN approves it, and the US backs Israel because it becomes a democratic country. There's not a lot of that going on in the Middle East. And so there's several reasons why the US backs Israel so much. Many Americans in the United States are evangelical Christians who have a particular affinity for Israel because of the Bible. The Judeo-Christian tradition, which I talked about at the beginning of the stream, is extraordinarily important in the United States. And because of that, the U.S. has a lot of affinity for Israel. Yeah, I don't know about Coventry. Let's see here. Manchuria. That's amazing, Cyrus. Well, I want to learn more about the Kurdish people, and I want to learn more about their involvement. They are people who probably deserve their own state as well, while I'm on the topic. Interesting. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that, Rita Astrakhan. Indians asking, do you see the Russian Federation winning a definitive war over Ukraine and capturing vast amounts of their land? Not right now. I think that, well, the war needs to end there too. And I think while the United States is supporting Ukraine, Putin's not going to get what he wants. Carthage, North Africa, was conquered by the Arabs with Islamic language and culture. Yes, the Maghreb, as it was called, belonged to the Romans. The Byzantines controlled it in the 600s, and the Arab century of conquest, which I wanted to talk about on the channel, as well as the Islamic Golden Age, led to them conquering North Africa, and that is why Egypt, which had been a Christian nation, became an Islamic nation, and is 90% Islamic to this day. Best Roman ruler, Alfeo. Yes, best. Maybe you're the best questioner today. It's tough to determine. I have to go with Augustus because he not only created the Roman imperial system, but he ruled the longest. Let me see. Was Troy, Stanley asked, was Troy a myth? I think you mean myth, but yes, not fully. The obvious story from the Iliad, from the movie Troy, is not true. Were people like Achilles and Odysseus real? Maybe. But basically, Troy was a city in Turkey, in Anatolia, as it was called back then, that was destroyed by the Greeks. The Greeks were mainly raiders and pirates. There was a king Agamemnon. There was a people of Mycenae. So oral tradition develops. This is an amazing historical trend. And that oral tradition becomes the basis for what we see now in the Trojan myth, where you have the involvement of the gods, you have this oral tradition passed down, and obviously Homer, the blind poet, decides to make the Iliad out of that. So it's a historically fictional account, but there's definitely history there, and it tells us a lot about how traditions develop and how stories develop. So there's a lot of history in the account of Troy. Troy was basically probably destroyed by Greek pirates from Mycenae and a coalition of Greek forces because it was a very hard city to destroy. Jessica's asking, do you enjoy reading U.S. local history such as Shelby Foote? I don't know who that is, but I do enjoy reading any type of history. I try to consider myself a history chameleon. Whatever history I'm learning about, that tends to be the one I like. And if you like this live stream and the history I'm talking about, like and subscribe. It really helps the channel grow. You're going to be a lot of robots? There's already robots. Look at what Elon Musk did this week. I'm going to go a little quickly because I want to catch up and wrap up the channel. Again, I don't know what PKK and YPJ are, so I still have to learn about. Do I have a wife or a GF? Again, that's personal. I try not to get into that too much. Yeah, it's very, very cold. In fact, England's climate has changed because of the mini ice age of the early modern era that we're still technically in, despite global warming. England used to have vineyards in it in the 1200s. Mulvania. You mean Moldovia? Let me see here. Money is the emperor. Yes, in many ways, money is the emperor. Yes, they do have a treaty. Yeah, Germany is extraordinarily expansive during the 19th century, and it bothers everyone and eventually leads to World War I. And basically, Germany could have won World War I because they were so good at production and had such a strong army. They were able to handle the Russians and the French. The problem is that they just kept ticking everybody off. By sinking ships, unrestricted submarine warfare, the indiscriminate use of U-boats, they got the Chinese, the Japanese, the Argentinians, and the Americans all angry at them by promising the Mexicans through the Zimmerman telegram that they could take over southwestern America if they attacked the United States. They got America involved in the war. Germany basically kind of stepped in it all throughout the war, just in this kind of concerted effort they were trying too hard to destroy the Allies. Which is interesting because I will say that the Allies actually officially at first were Germany, Austria, Hungary, and Italy, which abandoned them to join the other side called the Entente. Because history is written by the victors, the British, French, Americans didn't want to just be considered the Entente. They wanted to be the Allies, so they kind of changed it, and Germany and Austria-Hungary became the central powers because they were in Central Europe, along with their help from the Bulgarians and, of course, the Ottoman Empire, which was destroyed by World War I. The German Empire, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, the Ottoman Empire, and the Russian Empire are all destroyed. That war is where empires went to die. New Zealand did not invent the plane. Yeah, Sam, thank you for that. Yeah, I do have specifics. I talked a lot about Yom Kippur and the Jewish high holy days at the beginning and the development of Jewish religion. Yes, I have definite topics that I like to talk about, and you'll be hearing some more of them tomorrow because usually Saturday we get a lot more people. Sunday's a little more chill, and I can talk about more things. But I actually had on my bingo card talking about the Islamic century of conquest, so I got to that a little bit. But thank you for bringing that up, Sam. You're absolutely right. Let me see here. Stanley, any history to do with Halloween? Halloween, I can learn more specifics, but Halloween was considered a last gasp party similar to Mardi Gras, predating a Catholic holiday. Mardi Gras predates Ash Wednesday, where there is fasting. Mardi Gras literally means a fat something. I'm trying to remember exactly what it means. It's a French term, but Halloween is the eve before All Saints Day, which is before All Souls Day, November 1st and 2nd, respectively. So Halloween is a way to celebrate the dead, is a way to commemorate, and it's kind of this dark alternative to All Saints Day. I believe the habit of trick or treat developed more in England. The idea of witches. Europe during the 1600s was obsessed with witchcraft and wizardry and really, really was threatened by it. It was seen as the devil active in the world, things like that. Yeah, Stanley, that's just a little bit about it. I don't know too much. Anyways. Yeah, I'm not backing anything of that, Ken. Thank you, Brandon. I appreciate it. And Sarah saying, yes. So, Sarah, those are some of the earliest discriminations against Jews, curfews, the destruction of businesses. People were not allowed to enter into business with the Nuremberg laws. The Jews weren't allowed to enter into business with non-Jews. Jews weren't allowed to serve in the government, things like that. And yes, I will stay hydrated, although my mouth is getting very dry. That's why I'm trying to wrap it up. Interesting, Rob. So thank you. I appreciate that. A fact check. So they were not cannibals. They did not eat him, but they did kill him and cook him and take his bones. So I can see why people would develop historical myths, which I do a series on historical myths on the channel. You guys should check that out. Again, most of my content is short form, but I do longer length videos. I'm doing a longer length video on Columbus / Indigenous Peoples Day and the history behind both. But yeah, that is interesting. So the historical myths tell us a lot about history, like Napoleon wasn't short. There's a historical myth. Napoleon was actually average height. They didn't say the Titanic was unsinkable. That's a historical myth within a historical myth. But yes, see, you can develop a historical myth through an easy misunderstanding. I wonder why they used his bones, Rob. That's very fascinating. No, I wasn't really bullied at school. I was a little bit of a chattermouth, and then I learned to kind of keep it in between my ears. And now I'm just sharing it with all you people. Oscar Levant. Are you referring to the entertainer or producer? Yes, the U.S. government took over the Philippines. The Philippines, under Emilio Aguinaldo, thought that they would be free following the Americans defeating the Spanish. Didn't happen. Because basically the Americans fought the next 15 years to keep the Filipinos in line. Let me see here. Can you teach me English? You seem to be doing just fine with the English. So if you've been listening to me, you've been learning some English, because I use a lot of big words sometimes. Yes, Andrew, that's true. Colonialism definitely has a part to play in the way the Middle East is set up. That's why, but the British and the French didn't want to create new colonies because they knew the Americans wouldn't like it, so they set up mandates, which is why you have the Mandate of Palestine. Lenin originally saw Zionism as a liberation movement, but he quickly realized it is the colony. No, Lena, that's interesting, because Lenin was actually part Jewish, and Lenin didn't have a lot of affinity for the Jews. The Jews were seen as too capitalistic by the Bolsheviks, although some of the Bolsheviks were Jews, like Trotsky. Marx was a Jew. And the white Russians committed a series of pogroms and atrocities against the Jews during the Russian Civil War. The Bolsheviks were no friends to the Jews, especially to the wealthy Jews. And Stalin was actually planning a series of persecutions against the Jews before he died in the early 50s. Let me see. Glory to Israel, yeah. Let me see here. So the UN and US can choose who can have land without consulting the people who live there. Well, the thing was, you had people living there. So that's where the issue comes from. You have people who were living there who were Palestinian Arabs who wanted a state, and you had Jews who were living there as well who wanted a state. And so the British Mandate of Palestine actually has a two-state solution in it, a land for the Arab peoples and a land for the Israelis. The Arab Palestinians did not want to do it. Yeah, Nimrit, so there's truth that the Odyssey does, that there probably was an Odysseus, but not in the way of, not obviously in the mythical way. Ancient histories, even ancient historical accounts such as Eusebius's church histories and Thucydides' Peloponnesian War are full of accounts of divine miracles and stuff like that, which is why the gospel accounts can be seen as biographical, because those are full of, obviously, mythical and legendary and miraculous events. Same thing in ancient Greek histories too, by Herodotus and Thucydides. So yeah, Hans, it's not necessary. They did divide the land between the two groups of people. It is kind of colonizing with extra steps. I do agree with you there. Nephilim giants, comment, I know a little bit about what you're referring to. There is evidence of larger humans, something that a lot of people do not understand, however, and this is why the Napoleon myth started, and they're actually connected. Yes, the ancient giants and Napoleon. Goliath from the Bible. The David and Goliath story is connected to Napoleon. Ancient humans were a lot shorter due to malnutrition and all sorts of other things. Large, tall humans, 6 feet and above, could be considered giants easily. So, interesting. England still has vineyards. Yeah. Do I think there will be a World War III in the future? I actually technically believe, Ian, that's a great question. We've been talking about that a lot. I think there could be another world war. I actually technically believe there have been 3 world wars. I know I've been saying World War II and World War I indiscriminately, but that's because that's what you guys know it as. In my opinion, the First World War actually happened in the 1750s during what's called the 7-Year War. The Prussians basically get everybody mad at them, because that's what Frederick the Great does, and that's what Prussia does. And I was going to talk about Prussia on the channel. I'll talk about it more tomorrow on the live stream. But the Prussians get everyone mad at them and go to war with basically everybody in Europe, only with the British helping them because the French are involved. The French and the natives who are allied with the French fight against the British in North America and Canada. And the French and the British are pitting different Indian rulers called Rajas against each other. So there's fighting in India and off the coast of Africa for different forts created by the Europeans where they are trading slaves. There's fighting, and of course there's fighting in mainland Europe between the Russians, Prussians, Austrians, British, and French. And for me, when I look at that, when I study that, that's definitely a world war. It's not on the same grand scale because the empires aren't on the same grand scale and the technology isn't on the same grand scale as World War II and III, or as you call it, World War I and II. But for me, that constitutes a world war. And so the 7 Years' War, the French-Indian War, you've got minor conflicts going on like the Second Sino-Japanese War. There's a lot of parallels to World War II, World War I. So I would consider that the First World War. So that being said, are we on the way to what I would consider World War IV? It could be. I've talked a lot about that. Peace in the Middle East is a difficult thing to accomplish. It's going to be extraordinarily difficult as long as there is continual lack of recognition of Israel's right to exist by certain groups, and as long as the Israelis there's problems with there's continual oppression of the Palestinian people, and they do not have their own home state. Thank you. I appreciate that. I guess messy. I'll take that as a compliment. Yes, the Germans had several colonies in Africa that were actually turned over to Britain and France after World War I. Thank you, Anne. Enjoy. I really appreciate that. Yes, that's right. He was an actor. Yeah, Jewish American. A lot of famous Jewish Americans. And you got a name like Oscar Levant. There you go. Interesting. Samahan. I'll have to read about that. Again, you guys bring up stuff that I really, really learn about. Thank you, Dublin. I appreciate that. Let me see here. Am I a capitalist, communist, Marxist, or socialist? All three of those are almost the same thing, capitalism being the only difference. And in fact, there are some parallels between Marx and Adam Smith. So I don't reveal my own opinions. I do talk a little bit about economics and geopolitics. Ooh, Otter's here. Otter always has great questions. Welcome, Otter. What materials and goods did the Olmecs import to, and to whom did they sell the goods to? Why was it so influential? So I don't know a huge amount about the Olmecs, and by the way, neither does anyone. The Olmecs love jade and stone, and that's where we get the big stone heads. They're known for those very famous stone heads. They don't have a lot left behind them. It was very influential because they were one of the first societies to obviously exist, one of the earliest civilizations in Central America. They traded a lot, they farmed a lot, and they used a lot of stone. And that becomes huge for the Mayans and the Zapotecs and the Aztecs because they're also going to use a lot of stone. Yeah, Sarah's saying 80% of Jews in 1947 were from Europe, so it's understandable that they didn't want to leave their homes because they're European. Yeah, well, the Jews who had gone to Europe had migrated there themselves, and they had a history of bad treatment, but they didn't have a history of genocide. So that's obviously a problem. And a lot of the time, people do not understand that Jews are not European. There are Sephardic Jews from North Africa, and there are Mizrahim, who are Jews from Israel and the Middle East. There are a large number of Persian and Indian Jews, as a matter of fact. Thank you, Simon, for that. I appreciate you subbing. Yes, I agree with you, Sarah, on that. Believe it or not, I've gotten to the bottom. Isn't that amazing? Yes. And they do indeed have that. So I'm gonna call it 97 minutes is a record. We've gone for almost 100 minutes, an hour and a half, and you guys have been so wonderful. And yet Europe had genocides. Yes. Thank you. And I really appreciate Simon stepping up and Rodolfo in a big way to be my moderators. You guys are such a big help, and we've got a lot of people like this, which I hope we keep having. We are bound for greatness, and you guys help the History Channel be great. So if you want to be a friendly neighborhood historian, again, my last pitch to you, it's as easy as liking and subscribing, checking out the channel, follow me on my social media. You can look up Friendly Neighborhood History. I will have actually. And thank you, Ian, for subscribing. I really appreciate you. I will have you guys, sorry, I'm blanking. I will be sure to bring up more topics and be sure to join me tomorrow. I will have my moderator, my usual moderator, Matt, here, and he will put all of those great social media handles in there for you guys to check out so you guys can follow me and see some of my additional content and comments and posts on social media. and just become a devoted part of the Friendly Neighborhood History channel. The goal is 5,000 by the end of the year. If we could get to 6,000, that'd be amazing, because that's an official Roman legion, and I can say we are a legion. So anyways, thank you very much for joining and all your wonderful questions and comments, and for learning a little bit about history. Remember to like and subscribe if you enjoyed this. And I will, if anyone has any last question, I'll take one more. We're at last call here. If anyone, and I'm going to see if anyone has any last question, and then I'm going to wrap it up. That's always my tradition, even though we've gone for 100 minutes. Thank you, Otter. Thank you, Julian. You guys are so kind with all the great comments, feedback, people correcting me about Captain Cook. That's really interesting about the bones. What's my opinion about Russia? Oh boy, should we be here for another 100 minutes? I think Russia is a fascinating historical place. I think that a lot of people see it as liminal between Europe and Asia, but I really do see Russia in many ways as a European entity that is always trying to catch up to Europe and find the pulse of Europe. And right now it's engaged in an effort to restore its former glory. I am not related to Annalise. I do not know why you would ask that. I'm not sure. I don't know. Maybe I look like her. The core problem is Israel is a fascist and apartheid state. Israel has put a law. Yeah. Well, there definitely is there are some problems there, Hans, to be sure. And we can talk more about them at another point. But yeah, Der Einsen var, it sounds like a very German name. That is the best I can do. And the Russians are wonderful people with an amazing culture and history. And my actual emphasis of study and focus of study is Russian history. I have an entire playlist on the Russian czars. Go check that out right afterwards, and you can learn a lot about Russia. And I've got some stuff on Germany too, another fascinating place, another country that has caught up and has made itself a bulwark in Europe. So if you like everything you're hearing about, subscribe, check out my other content, see about those Russian czars, see about the US president, see about some of the most powerful women in the world, and and daily history, daily biography, daily rest in peace videos. Yeah, Hans, I appreciate what you're saying, because I think there's some truth. There's definitely some truth there. And hopefully the truth is that you really loved this live stream and that you like and subscribe. And I will see you again tomorrow at 4 p.m. Eastern time for part 2, where I will go more into my topics, probably because we usually have less people. But if you guys have things you want to ask, be sure to bring them up tomorrow. I will see you all then. Have a great rest of your evening. Take care, everybody. Peace.